Mark Ciampach, the author of Security Plus Guide to Network Security Fundamentals, 4th edition. In this lecture video, we will talk about Chapter 1, Introduction to Security. Security is a primary concern of both computer professionals and end users today. There are several challenges of securing information. What exactly is information security? Who are those that launch these attacks? And why do they do so? What are the basic steps in an attack? And what are the basic principles of defending ourselves? In this chapter, we'll introduce information security and see why it is so very important today. Remember, stay secure. Chapter 1, Introduction to Security. Security Plus Guide to Network Security Fundamentals, 4th edition. Here are our objectives for our lecture video. We want to describe the challenges of securing information. We'll define information security and tell why it's important today. We'll look at the types of attackers that are commonly found today and what's their motivation. We'll list the basic steps in an attack, and we'll describe the 5 basic principles in the defense. Let's begin with an introduction. When historians reflect back on this early part of the 21st century in which we live, it's likely that these future historians will summarize our early 21st century experiences with one word, and that's the word security. It's because at no other time in the world's history have we been forced to protect ourselves and our property from what seem to be continual attacks by almost invisible foes. How often every week do we hear about suicide car bombings, subway massacres, airplane hijackings, random shootings, guerrilla commando raids? These occur on an all too frequent basis around the world. And so to counteract this violence, governments and other entities are implementing new types of security defenses. These attacks and the security defenses have impacted our lives, our daily lives, very significantly. How often is it that we think nothing anymore of having to walk through the security checkpoint line in the airport, when just over 10 years ago, such a thing simply did not exist? As an example, we have our lives impacted on a daily basis regarding security and their defenses. Now, one area that has been especially a frequent target of attacks is that of information technology. There seem to be an almost endless array of attacks that are directed today at corporations, banks, schools, and individuals through our technology devices, computers, laptops, smartphones, pad computers. As an example, internet web servers today must resist thousands of attacks every day. The need to defend against these attacks on our technology devices has created a new element of IT that's really become the very core of the entire industry, and that's known as information security. Information security is focused on protecting the electronic information of organizations and users. And the demand for IT professionals who know how to secure networks and computers is at an all-time high today. Now, unlike some other IT positions, security is not being offshored, and it's very rarely being outsourced. Students who are in the field of IT, studying to become IT professionals, are frequently concerned about, if I go into a specific area of IT, will that job still be around in the next 10 to 15 years? There are many areas of IT that have been offshored to foreign nations, or outsourced to other entities. However, information security is not one of those areas. It's rarely outsourced, and it's never offshored. Why? That's because security is such a critical element in an organization. So security positions must remain within the organizations. And security positions don't involve on-the-job training. The risk is simply too high. No, for someone who's going into the area of information technology security, the employer wants that person to have already a strong foundation and be able to be up and running in no time. Now, to verify security competency, most organizations, the overwhelming majority of organizations, use the CompTIA Security Plus certification. It is by far the most widely recognized vendor-neutral security certification in existence today. Security Plus has become the security foundation for today's IT professionals. And currently over 200,000 individuals hold the Security Plus certification. Now, the CompTIA Security Plus certification is aimed at those individuals in the IT profession who have this minimum background. 2 years of experience in IT administration with a focus on security. The person likewise should be involved in daily technical information security experience and likewise have a broad knowledge of security concerns and implementations. The CompTIA Security Plus certification, as we said, is vendor neutral, and it requires the individual to pass the current certification exam, which is the exam SY0301. This exam is internationally recognized as validating the foundation level skills and knowledge regarding security. Now, a successful candidate should have the knowledge and skills required to identify risks, participate in risk mitigation activities, provide infrastructure, application, operational, and information security, apply security controls to maintain confidentiality, integrity, and availability, identify appropriate technologies and products, and operate with an awareness of applicable policies, laws, and regulations. There are many challenges today to securing information. Our chapter lists in detail several current attacks that have taken place. This is just a list of some of those, and any one of those can be downright scary. Individuals today are under constant attack of those who may be halfway around the world trying to compromise our defenses, gain control of our computers, steal our information, and use it for their financial gain. In fact, this table lists some of the selected security breaches that involve personal information being taken in just 1 month period. We face today many difficulties in defending against these attacks. Here are some of them. First, every device today, every electronic device today, is connected to other devices. When was the last time you saw a computer for sale that did not have a connection for an Ethernet jack or did not have a wireless connection? It's simply not found. That's because everything is universally connected. And that's great because it opens up the door to so many additional resources beyond just the pad computer that's in our hand or our desktop computer. We want our devices to be interconnected so that they can share and access information. However, these universally connected devices also open the doorway for attackers to gain access to our systems. there is an increased speed of attacks that occur today. Attacks are growing in their level of sophistication. It's more difficult to defend against these sophisticated attacks than it used to be. There also is a greater availability and a simplicity of attack tools. Not all attackers are extremely proficient IT professionals. Many of them are simply mid-level IT users who have access to these attack tools and can use them to craft their own attacks. And another reason why it's difficult to defend against attacks today is that attackers are able to detect vulnerabilities in systems at a much faster rate than used to be the case. This next screen shows us a particularly interesting attack tool. It's what's known as Backtrack, and it illustrates for us that if an individual wants to use this Backtrack product in attacking others, we have a long list here of choices in order to create an attack, and it's as easy as picking one of these items off of a menu and then creating our attack. Sophisticated knowledge of IT is no longer necessary if an individual wants to attack someone else. Some of the other difficulties in defending against attacks include delays in patching. We'll discuss patching soon, but briefly, patching involves discovering a vulnerability in a system and then crafting a protection so that vulnerability no longer exists. However, there often are delays in patching, that a vulnerability may be uncovered, yet it could be weeks, sometimes months, and even years before that vulnerability is corrected by the vendor. That means that security hole exists for an attacker to exploit over a lengthy period of time. There's likewise a weak distribution in patches. Now, operating systems like Microsoft Windows and Apple Mac have excellent tools so that a vulnerability that's uncovered in the operating system can be patched very quickly by having the patch pushed out to the user's computers. But think about all the other application software packages that might rest on your desktop computer, or the apps that might be on your pad. Is there a functionality that exists for a patch to be easily and quickly distributed to any of these other applications that may exist and have a vulnerability exposed? Unfortunately, the answer is no. Very few vendors have taken it upon themselves to craft good, solid, and timely distribution of patches. This is just another reason why defending against attacks is difficult. Attacks today are more distributed than they used to be. Instead of coming from just one source, an attacker can use hundreds or thousands of other computers to leash their attacks on users. And in doing so, we have, it's almost like a mini against one sort of scenario, where we have attacks flooding into our one computer. And finally, user confusion. Most users are confused about securing their devices and the data that's contained on those devices. If you're to ask, for instance, the average user some questions like, how long are your passwords? Most users would probably say, maybe 6 characters at the most. It's well known that passwords today that are fewer than 8 characters are virtually hopeless. It's recommended that passwords have 12 or more characters. because of the speed of computers today, these systems can very easily generate millions of passwords each minute in order to try to break a user's account. Users are confused about the importance of information security, and they're confused regarding what they should do to keep their system secure. This is found not only at the home, but also in the workplace as well. This user confusion is rampant. This table lists for us the reason why there are difficulties in defending against attacks and a description of those reasons. We've been talking about information security, but what exactly do we mean? What is information security? Before a defense is possible, it's important to understand what information security is, why it's important, and who the attackers are. One thing that's very key to information security is to understand that there is a trade-off between safety and convenience. As the safety level of something increases, the convenience level will likewise decrease, that inverse relationship. Consider, for instance, you may have grandparents, or maybe even great-grandparents, who at one time in their lives thought it was very inconvenient to have to lock the door to their house. Why? Because they didn't want to have to carry around another set of keys. I can remember very well my grandparents, for instance, when we would visit them and all go out somewhere, they wouldn't lock the door to their house. And that was just an alarm to us. Why not, we'd say. And their response was, well, I didn't want to carry the keys to the door with me. No need to do so. Well, they looked at the convenience as outweighing the safety. And when we talk about security, there's always a trade-off in safety and convenience. The safer something is, the less convenient it's going to be for us. We can think about that in terms of locking our house. We can think about that in terms of our electronic resources as well. That is to say, it's much safer if I have a 12-character password, but the convenience may decrease because I've got to memorize a password that's longer than 4 or 6 characters. So there is this trade-off between safety and convenience that's important to understand in terms of information security. Now, security generally are the steps that are used to protect a person or property from any type of harm. Now, that harm may be intentional, someone wanting to do something against us, or sometimes it may simply be non-intentional. And as we said, it's necessary for us to oftentimes sacrifice convenience for safety when we talk about security. Again, it's more convenient for me to never have to lock the doors to my house. But yet, that's not a very safe thing to do. Now, information security describes the task of securing information that is in a digital format. This digital information to be secured may be such that it is manipulated by a microprocessor, like on my personal computer. It might be stored on a magnetic or optical solid-state storage device, maybe like a hard drive, a DVD, a flash drive, an SSD. And this digital information may be transmitted over a network, such as a local area network or the internet. So, that's the digital information that needs to be secured. And we can immediately see that, wow, there are a lot of different attack vectors here that an attacker could use in order to gain access to my information. I mean, it's being transmitted over a network. There's an attack vector that an attacker could attempt to exploit. It's stored on a device. There again is another means by which an attacker can attempt to gain access to that information. It's manipulated on a microprocessing device. Again, another means by which an attacker can gain access to it. It's not just that my information is in a locked box, in a locked cabinet, in a locked room, in a locked building. No, information is being transmitted, it's being stored, it's being manipulated, and thus it must be protected in these and other stages. Now, information security ensures that protective measures are properly implemented. Yet, it's always good to remind ourselves that no matter what security measures you have, they can never completely guarantee safety. It's never designed to be 100% foolproof. In our homes or apartments or dorms, we might have door locks, and we might have window locks, and we might lock the door every time we go out and check to make sure that the windows are secured, and that's very important. But these things are not going to guarantee that no one will ever break into our home or our apartment or our dorm room. No, security measures cannot guarantee complete safety, and information security cannot completely prevent attacks or guarantee that a system is totally secure. But we're creating a defense that attempts to ward off attackers and also prevents the collapse of the system when a successful attack does occur. So information security is about protection. There really are three types of information protection. We call these the CIA. It has nothing to do with the organization in Washington, but it's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This is the type of information protection that we seek to have with information security. Confidentiality says that only approved individuals can access this information. Integrity says that the information is correct and has not been altered, because sometimes an attacker may not want to steal information, but just want to alter that information. And it involves availability, that the information is accessible to those who are authorized to gain access to it. Now, these protections are implemented so that they can secure information. They can secure its authentication, its authorization, and its accounting, sometimes called AAA. The authentication, individual who they claim to be actually are that individual. Authorization, granting the ability to access information. And accounting, providing a tracking of events. Here's a table that lists different layers and descriptions. Because with information security, we're interested in layers. And we'll talk more about layers shortly. But what we want to do is have layers around our information in order to protect it. One layer is that of products. These form, if you would, the physical security around the data. It could be something like a door lock. It could be a firewall. It could be very complicated network security equipment. Another layer protecting our data is that of people. These are the individuals who implement and then properly use the security products. And finally, procedures. This is yet a third layer around our data. These are the plans and policies that are established by an organization that ensure that the people, yet another layer, correctly use the products, which yet are another layer. So we have three layers here: products, people, procedures. But these layers that encircle our data all interact with each other. This next figure may provide that information to us, that illustration to us, where at the very core, in the very center, we have our information, and we want to maintain the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of that information. So we use hardware devices, we use software, we use communication, that's all involved. And what encircles that are the products, the physical security, the people, the personnel security, and the procedures, that is the organizational security. Now there are specific terms that are used in information security. We'll look at some of those. The first is that of an asset. An asset is simply an item that has some value to it. Not all items, obviously, have the same value. In an organization, I may have data on the latest research and development work that I'm doing. That's very critical data, and that data has to be protected. Of course, if it's stolen, it could, in effect, mean that we're not going to be able to develop the latest and greatest product and continue to lead our organization forward. However, that's one type of data. Another type of data might be the telephone number of one of our customers. Well, generally, that second type of data, although it has value, it doesn't have the high value as the R&D item might. So an asset is simply some item that has a value, although that value may differ between different items. A threat are actions or events that have the potential to cause harm. Harm meaning if someone perhaps were to steal this data or manipulate the data, it could result in a negative aspect. A threat agent, on the other hand, is a person or an element who has the power to carry out a threat. Let's look at a table of some of these different types of elements where we have information, application software, system software, physical items, and services, and these elements are all information technology assets, as we've mentioned a moment ago. Some of them may be very critical to the organization. Others, however, may not be. Continuing with information security technology, a vulnerability is defined as a flaw or a weakness. It's something that a threat agent can bypass security. Now a risk. We'll talk more about risk in detail, but a risk is simply the likelihood that a threat agent will exploit some vulnerability. Risk cannot be completely eliminated. The cost is simply too high. It would take too long to do so. So some degree of risk is always assumed. What can I do with risk? Well, I might accept it and simply realize there's a chance of a loss. I might try to diminish the risk by taking more precautions than I might normally do. And most information security risks should be diminished. Or I might transfer the risk to someone else. Purchasing insurance is a good example of transferring risk. I might own something of value, like an automobile, yet I carry insurance because I'm transferring the risk to a third party, the insurance company, that if something happens to my car, they're going to compensate me for it. I don't have to bear the risk entirely myself if I were to be involved in an accident and the car were to be damaged. I'm letting the third party do that. So I'm transferring the risk to someone else. And this figure shows us some of the different terminology in information security in relation to a scenario that we have in Chapter 1 about stolen rims. And here are the different terms that we've looked at, the example in that scenario, plus an example in information security. An asset could be an employee database. A threat could be stealing the data. Threat agent could be an attacker. It could be a virus. It could be a flood. A vulnerability, maybe a defect in the software. An exploit could be to send the virus to an unprotected email server. Risk might be educating users. Now, in preventing data theft, this is very important because security is often associated with theft prevention. And business data theft of proprietary information is very important. We gave the example a few minutes ago of a research and development program at some organization, how important it is for them to protect their data from being stolen. For an individual, however, the theft of my credit card number could be disastrous for me. Now, thwarting identity theft is something that's very important today. Identity theft involves using another person's personal information for financial gain, using it in an unauthorized manner. For instance, an individual might steal a person's social security number. Then they could create new credit card accounts because they have the person's identity, their name, their social security number. They could charge purchases. They would leave all of that unpaid and let the poor victim be the one who has to sort through everything. There have been some recent studies where individuals who have had their identities stolen have had to spend upwards of $30,000 just to get everything back to normal. Another reason for the importance of information security has to do with legal consequences. There are several laws in place that an organization who does not take the proper steps in securing information can find themselves being liable for those thefts of data. Some of the laws we have that protect electronic privacy include the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, Sarbanes-Oxley, Graham-Leach, Bliley, the California Database Security Breach Notification Act in 2003. For the very first time, individuals who had their information compromised, these individuals had to be contacted within a specific period of time from the organization from which that information was stolen. And they had to be given information regarding what they could do about it. All other states, virtually, have adopted something like this California Database Security Breach Notification Act in order to protect individuals today from information that's being stolen. Another importance of information security has to do with productivity. This table lists the cost of attacks. If I have an organization that has 250 people, for instance, and maybe an average salary of $25 an hour, the number of employees to combat the attack, the hours required to stop the attack and clean it up, total lost salaries, total lost hours of production, you can see from this table that there is an extremely high cost in terms of productivity when a successful attack occurs. Foiling cyber terrorism, likewise, is another important reason for information security. Cyber terrorism generally is defined as premeditated and politically motivated attacks. The target of cyber terrorists could be information, it could be computer systems, could be just data. What they want to do is cause panic, provoke violence, perhaps result in a financial catastrophe. One example that's often given is that of our electrical grid. For a cyber terrorist to bring down the electrical grid, let's say in the northeast part of the United States, there would be tens of millions of individuals who would be adversely affected, and that could go on for several days or even weeks. Imagine what it's like to be without any electricity for a lengthy period of time. How bad it is when we have a storm that goes through and we're without electricity one night. Imagine what it's like to be without electricity for 20 days. A cyber terrorist group or person who has politically motivated reasons for doing so could launch an attack on the electrical grid and, in effect, bring a particular part of the nation to its knees. Other potential cyber terrorism targets: banking, military, transportation, like an air traffic control system, water systems. But who exactly are these attackers? What's their motivation for doing so? There basically are 6 categories of attackers: hackers, script kiddies, spies, insiders, cyber criminals, and cyber terrorists. Let's drill down and take a detailed look at each one of these. We'll begin with the term hacker. A hacker is often defined as a person who uses their computer skills to attack computers. Now, this term is not commonly used in the security community. More often it's used in the consumer press, but it's not found widespread in the security community because of several reasons. One is the baggage that this term carries with it. Sometimes individuals in the past have tried to distinguish between a white hat hacker and a black hat hacker, saying a white hat hacker is like a good guy. They're trying to find out what vulnerabilities exist, and then they would let the victim know so they could then close those holes. Whereas a black hat hacker, their goal is defined as being malicious and destructive. And although these terms have been used in the past, more frequently today the term attacker is used instead of hacker, without trying to talk about what their motivation is. Are they a white hat person? Are they a black hat person? Script kiddies is another category of attacker. A script kiddie is someone who may not be very skilled at all in IT, and they generally would want to break into a computer, perhaps to create damage. Not so much as they're going to steal something and sell it on the open market, but they simply want to do damage. They may download automated, what's called scripts, and then use them to perform malicious acts. And as we noticed earlier, a lot of this attack software today is simply menu-based. So they could download this software, pick their attack off of a menu, and then try to find a vulnerable system. These attacks are very easy for these unskilled users. It's estimated that some 40% of attacks are performed by script kiddies. Spies is yet another category of attacker. A computer spy is a person, generally, who's been hired to break into a computer to steal information. They've been hired to attack a specific computer or a system that contains sensitive information. Their goal is to steal information without drawing attention to their actions. And generally, spies have excellent computer skills so that they can make the attack and then they can cover up their tracks. We generally don't think about it, but insiders are another category of attackers. These could be employees, these could be third-party contractors, these could be business partners. It's estimated that 48% of all security breaches are attributed to insiders. Wow, that means almost all successful attacks are because of individuals who are on the inside doing the attacking. Here are some examples of insider attacks. Some of these are very high-profile type of attacks, but they illustrate the fact that the bad guys are not always outside the four walls, but they might often be inside as well. A cyber criminal. This generally is used to describe a network of attackers and identity thieves, financial fraudsters. They are different from ordinary attackers in that they're more highly motivated, they take more risk, they often are better funded. They're tenacious. They continue and continue and continue and don't give up easily. And their goal is that of financial gain. Oftentimes, these individuals are organized gangs of young attackers. Cybercrime has targeted attacks against financial networks where unauthorized access to information is uncovered and exploited. It's the theft of personal information. Financial cybercrime could be trafficking in stolen credit cards and financial information, maybe using spam to commit fraud. Cyber criminals are different, though, than cyber terrorists. These cyber terrorists have an ideological motivation. They attack because of their principles and their beliefs. Perhaps they want to deface electronic information. Maybe they want to spread misinformation or propaganda. They might want to deny service to legitimate computer users. The result is they're going to have some sort of negative impact because of their beliefs. Let's turn our attention to attacks and defenses, and we'll start by looking at the basic steps in an attack. What we find in a typical attack is that, first of all, the attacker is going to probe the system for information. What type of computer hardware is used? What sort of networking equipment is there? What version of the operating system is found on this computer? With that information at hand, then the attacker can take the next step of penetrating the defenses that may be out there. They actually launch the attack, if you would. If the attacker knows that the individual is using, let's say, a dated version of Microsoft Windows XP, an old, outdated version that no longer has necessary security patches distributed from Microsoft, they then, with that knowledge, number one, could then penetrate the defenses and exploit those vulnerabilities, number two, in launching their attack. Now, once the attack is successful, generally they want to, number three, modify security settings. This, of course, would allow the attacker then to re-enter the compromised system, really whenever they wanted to. They then would circulate to other systems, that is, use the same tool directed towards other systems that might be associated or connected with this computer that they've compromised. And then they might want to paralyze networks and devices. Now, not all the time would they want to do this paralysis. They might simply want to steal the information and quietly slip away. But many attacks have this 5-step sort of scenario. In fact, here's a figure that illustrates those steps of an attack. Let's now turn our attention to basic defenses against attack. There are 5 fundamental security principles for defenses. These are layering, limiting, diversity, obscurity, and simplicity. Let's take a look at each one. It's important that our security be created in layers. Why? If I have a single defense mechanism, the attacker can focus on that one defense mechanism and may be able to defeat it or circumvent it. However, if I have multiple layers of defense, it's much more unlikely that an attacker could break through successive layers of this defense, particularly if the layers are all different. So the layered security approach is very useful in resisting attacks and really provides the most comprehensive type of protection. Limiting is next. I want to limit access to information because this will reduce the threat against it. And I limit the access so that only those who must have the data are granted access. For example, in an organization, only the individuals who need access to the human resource records of employees that contains their social security number, that contains their salary, that contains all sorts of information that needs to be protected. If only those individuals who absolutely must have access to that data are granted access, then this is what's known as limiting. A need-to-know type of basis exists here. For instance, that might be done through technology, by file permissions, that an individual is given the right to access that information if there is a need to do so, but it's simply not open for anyone to gain access to that file. It might be done through a procedural way in which we might prohibit the removal of document from premises. There are a variety of ways in which we can do the limiting, but limiting, like layering, is one of those fundamental defenses against attacks. That I'm going to limit who has access to that data, because the more individuals who have access to the data, that opens up more possibilities and more vulnerabilities for an attacker to exploit. Now, closely related to limiting is something known as diversity. Remember we talked about layers. Layers need to be diverse. That is, they need to be different. So if an attacker is able to penetrate through one layer, those same techniques would not be used in order to break through other layers. By layering and having those layers different, diversity, even if an attacker was to penetrate one layer, they really, in effect, would have to start all over again in trying to penetrate the next layer. So, breaching one layer doesn't compromise the whole system. An example of diversity might be using security products from different manufacturers. Obscurity. I want to obscure inside details from outsiders. If the insiders are left in the dark, if the outsiders rather are left in the dark about what's going on the inside, it makes it much more difficult for them to craft a defense. If someone on the outside does not know what brand of firewall that I'm using on the inside, it makes it more difficult for them to perhaps craft an attack on that particular type of firewall. I will not reveal details about the type of computer, the operating system, the brand of software. This simply makes it more difficult for an attacker to devise an attack if they don't know that information. And finally, simplicity. The nature of information security can be very complex. And complex systems can be difficult to understand. They can be difficult to troubleshoot. And often, complex systems are compromised for easy use by trusted users, but that compromising also makes it easy for an attacker to circumvent. So, secure systems need to be simple for insiders to understand and use, simple from the inside, but complex from the outside, and that in and of itself is a real challenge. So, there are our 5 defense layers: layering, limiting, diversity, obscurity, and simplicity. As a summary now of what we talked about in Chapter 1, we've talked about information security attacks growing in recent years, growing exponentially, and talked about the reasons for defending against these different types of attacks that keep occurring today. Remember that there are several reasons why it's difficult. Universally connected devices, increased speed of attacks, greater sophistication of attacks, availability and simplicity of attack tools, faster detection of weaknesses, delays in patching, weak distribution of patches, distributed attacks, user confusion. These, of course, are reasons why it's difficult to defend against attacks. We said that information security protects the information's integrity, confidentiality, and availability. And this is on devices that store, manipulate, and transmit the information, and we use these layers of products, people, and procedures. We said that there are goals as well. What I want to do with my security is prevent data theft, thwart identity theft. I want to avoid any sort of legal consequences, maintain productivity, and foil any sort of cyber terrorism. We've talked about different types of people with different motivations conduct computer attacks. We said an attack generally has 5 steps to it. Not always, but generally speaking. And our objectives in this chapter have been to describe the challenges of securing information, to define information security and tell why it's important, to identify the types of attackers that we commonly find today, to list the basic steps of an attack, and to describe the 5 basic principles of defense. There we have it for Chapter 1, Introduction to Security, Security Plus Guide to Network Security Fundamentals, 4th edition. Remember, stay secure.